Why are you here? No, really, why are you here? Some of you might be wondering, well, I'm here because I want to learn about, web performance techniques, to boost the metrics on my sites. But somewhere along the line, have we forgotten about our end users? What's the end goal? A lot of times we often forget about that. So I want to start this talk with a tale. All right. So this is a notable professional development company who's been in business for about 60 plus years. So what they traditionally do is provide on-site training and like team building or bias training to different businesses and organizations. But the times have changed, so they're like, okay, we need to create a digital platform so that we can reach a bigger market. So they hired their in-house team of developers to build the site, and they've invested $2.5 million in development and marketing. So, the team is, gone to do their different tasks and duties. They have a tight deadline to get this out because the company's so excited. They expect such a big return on their investment. So the few days before the product launch, everybody has come back together and it's like, okay, the developer's done his job, the front-end developers, got the user interfaces built, the designers have collaborated with the marketing to figure out how visuals will look, and the back-end developers, built the functionality. So the product launches, and it's a complete bust. Nobody visits the site. And the team comes back and wonders to themselves, like, what went wrong? Like, we did everything that we were supposed to do. Our project manager gave us our timeline. We met all the deadlines. What's the problem? Well, somewhere along the line, web performance fell through the crack. And as a result, this company lost millions of dollars. It's a sad story. So what's the issue? So a lot of times when we think about, the journey of a product, it's like this clear path of ideation, implementation, and product launch. This is kind of the reality that we face for a lot of companies, especially this, company that I talked about. But in fact, while the story that I just gave you is fictional, the underlying principle of the challenges that many companies face with web performance is true. So this is really the expectation that, we have these clear steps and, one step after the next, everything works fine, but this is not, plans don't go quite as we expect. So this is more like the reality. So, it starts off kind of good, but then once we start to build it, things just kind of go off plans, and then we get a product, but a lot of times it's not what we thought it was going to be at the start. But why is that? Well, a lot of the times it's because there's this gap between, our business leaders who set the strategic vision of our products and services, and then once we get to the implementation, there's not a lot of cross-dialogue, and so things tend to go off track. So what do we do about this? Well, what we can do is we can kind of think about how we can design web performance, and in fact, how we can, prioritize the culture which, says performance matters, so that we're like this company that loses a lot of money. And I'm excited today to talk to you about how we can leverage the power of service design to boost web performance. But a little bit about me. So I use a human-centered, design-led, and data-driven approach to help to envision and implement positive futures. I work with companies to help them solve problems. And I'm excited to, show you, the power of service design and kind of get into how we can use it. So you might be asking yourselves, okay, what is service design? She didn't really tell us what it was, but so this is the definition. So service design is a human-centered design approach that places an equal value on the customer experience and the business process, aiming to create quality customer experiences and seamless service delivery. So for service design, there's really two parts of it. You have the customer-facing customer experience from the customer's perspective, but we also have to consider the business process because you really can't have one without the other. We can imagine like the best possible, experiences for our customers, but if our business processes and infrastructures aren't in place, we can't support that. So to dig a little bit deeper, again, there's these two parts. So the first part, again, is looking at our end-to-end customer journey. So it's considering like where our customers happy, where they're sad, and like within a context of time. So a lot of you might know what user experience might be, and like how does that kind of differ from what I'm talking about now? Well, for user experience, we typically think about like specific touch points. So it could be a home page, or it could be a registration form. But service design is a bit more zoomed out. It's looking at multiple touch points over spans of time and understanding like the entire ecosystem of your service. And it's, again, based on research, that kind of like an aggregate of data from your different customers to understand what that journey is. And then the second part, which is kind of the business perspective, which is surface to core, where we're starting off with our user's perspective. So that's kind of what this like top line is. But from there, we start to drill and see, okay, what are the different policies, systems, internal structures that are in place that either support or hinder this experience. So the different colors just kind of represent the different categories. And we'll kind of go into a bit more detail about what the different things you can do. But you might be also wondering, okay, how does this relate to web performance? Well, we can use service design to see where our user experience web performance breakdowns occur throughout our entire journey. So essentially, we can look at the different metrics at specific pages and see, okay, what's preventing our users from being able to, access our homepage or register or, do what their intended goal. Like, what is the blocker? We can see where they're most likely to drop off due to poor web performance experiences. So, question by a show of hands: how many of you have done a web performance audit? Cool. So most of you make sense where perf matters. It does make sense. So today I'm going to walk you through a service design web performance audit, which is a little bit different. I would say it's kind of like the first step that you would do before you start to kind of run your test. It gives you the context for why you're, again, going back to the end goal, why are you here, why are you doing it? And so we're going to break this down into two parts. So the first part is looking at the customer journey, so the end-to-end process. And we're going to use the case study of this professional development company as kind of how we would use it. And then the second part is, running the test and actually getting into the audit. So let's get started. So when we talk about our customers' journey, we can kind of block them off into phases. So phases are like big chunks that kind of summarize the entire journey. So for this professional development company, the first phase might be the awareness phase, where the customer might find out about the professional development, online site. So it could be through word of mouth, it could be online, just many different touch points, but how do they find out about it? And then the second part is join. So, when they decide to register, sign up, how does that process look like? And then from there, the onboarding process, where, they get the logistics of how to, use the portal, sign up for different courses. And again, this could go on, continuously, if they decide to sign up for another course, or if they recommend the service to somebody else. But for the sake of this talk, we'll just focus on these three main phases. So what I'm going to do now is kind of walk through a customer journey. Okay, so meet Helen. Helen is a busy HR professional, and she's on her lunch break, so she's just chilling, scrolling on her phone, and she's probably on Twitter or something, on her lunch break. And she notices, this ad for this professional development training course. She's like, okay, I've heard of this company. They've been in business for a long time. Okay, I'm curious. I have time to kill. So she decides to click the link on the tweet, and she gets to the homepage. And from there, she scrolls, and she's like, okay, bias training. I see some different, things that I like. So she decides to find out more information. And so a little bit of time passes, could be after her break, it could be days later. She decides, okay, I'm going to register. She puts in her information and signs up. And then after that, she gets her portal where she can start to browse different courses. And she's like, okay, I think I might take this bias training to kind of test it out before I roll it out to the team. So she's doing that. She's smiling. She's happy. A couple of weeks later, and she's done, and everything's great. So does anything seem kind of interesting about this journey? Think to yourself. Okay. So if you thought, okay, everything works as well as it should. There's no hiccups. Helen was able to go from one step to the next. Everything works fine. Well, we describe this as the happy path. The path that we expected to work. A lot of times and I'm often guilty of this as well. It's this is the path that it should work. But what about those moments where there's some friction or some user frustration? When could she get frustrated and decide, I don't have the time? So we'll come back to that to kind of see where those points are. But before we go there, a good question to consider is, what makes a good user journey? Well, it's grounded in research. So again, we everyone brings in their own kind of like biases, their own assumptions to the table of how something should work. But we have to remember that what we build is, we're not our end user. So we have to kind of validate those assumptions to see, are we on the right track? Are we, doing what we should do? But user research is contextual. So, it's not enough to just do research. It's like finding out the right information. So it's about who visits your site, when do they visit your site, where are they? So for Helen, on her lunch break, she could, be out and about with a spotty connection. That's a cool, important thing to take into consideration. How often? Is it their first time, or they're, a repeat user? Why? Are they really interested about the service, or are they just, curious and want to find out more? And then to even think even broader about what are their needs, wants, and frustrations outside of just this particular product or service, but just understanding that. So, okay, let's look at this journey again. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about, maybe where the first point of friction might be. I'll get a sip of water. Okay, everybody kind of got their guess to themselves? Okay, so when she clicks on the home page, that it could potentially take a long time for that page to load. So that's one potential point of friction. And, especially if she's just kind of scrolling and passing, that could be a deal breaker. She might be like, I don't have the time to wait, and that could be a conversion, out the table. But she might be, really curious, really invested. She could be an existing customer. So maybe she might say, okay, maybe I'll come back to my desk and have a more secure connection so I can try this again. So another potential point of friction could be after she signs up and she notices that the portal is like buggy and slow and she's unable to do what she needs to do. So these are kind of like the two main points of friction in this journey. And so this is where we'll kind of like dig to see what are the issues and what's causing the friction and the tension. So this leads us to part 2, which is actually performing the audit point. But again, we have that context of the journey. So now we understand, like, we might be zooming in into the specific pages, but we get the context of, where our user is along the journey and preventing the drop-off rate. Okay, so as Rick mentioned, that good metrics are user-centric. So, of course, there are many different tests that we can run, but for the sake of this talk, just focusing on first paint, first meaningful paint, and time to interactive. Okay, so the team, they do this audit and they run some tests on the home page, and they realize that it takes 3.5 seconds just to get a first paint on desktop and 4 seconds on mobile. It's a long time for anything to show up. And when you look at the first meaningful, the time to interactive is 12 seconds on desktop and 15 seconds on mobile. This is ridiculous. So they dig a little bit deeper because we see the values, but why? Let's kind of see what the cause could be. So, okay, they see that, the CSS and the JS files are not minimized. You're like, okay, that's easy, just, minimize them. Quick fix, right? And then another issue is that the static files are fetched for each and every page load, and you might be thinking, just cache them, right? That's simple. But let's try to dig a little bit deeper and to see what's the cause of this. Could it be that, marketing is requesting, these high resolution images and like 12 fonts because, this is the first page that the user sees, so they want that brand recognition and awareness. But when we think about it, is it really helping us? Because users are being frustrated, so instead of promoting the brand, users are frustrated, so it actually hurts the brand. So it's kind of really thinking about the impact of certain decisions that are being made, and even if they're not even technical decisions, kind of what the result might look like later on. Okay, so now let's look at the user portal page. So as you can see that these values are even worse because, once Helen logs in, she has to deal with like these video files that are buffering and they're taking forever to load. It's buggy, it's slow, she can't, look at the different courses. It's just frustrating. 5 seconds for anything to show up on desktop and then 6 on mobile. Like, these values are ridiculous. So we dig a little bit deeper and we kind of see what the issue is, and we see that it's excessive JavaScript execution time and enormous network payloads. Wow, so JavaScript is really to blame for this. But why? I mean, what's the issue? Could it be that, you know, a developer is dealing with a very tight timeline trying to get out of this technical debt? So if there's a framework or library that's available that speeds up their development productivity, why not use it? You know, save some time. But we see that, you know, having efficiency within development might lead to inefficiency for users and frustration. So it's a bit of a way of being able to meet tight deadlines, but also understand our users' perspective to be able to juggle both of these sides. So now they run this audit, and now they're thinking to themselves, now what? What do we do next? So we go back to our, imagine we're kind of like been on this journey with our technical team, and like thinking to themselves, okay, what can we do about this, right? So there's a whole bunch of different options that are available. So they start to shout amongst themselves like, okay, we can just use like a CDN or like a cache storage API, right? Or, you know, we can just make this into a progressive web app, use some web protocols to reduce our plugins. So they just continue to shout out all these different solutions, but then there's this one quiet person that's like, what about the end goal? Like, why? Like, what are we doing? And so they're kind of pondered to themselves like, what do you mean? But see, the problem with, you know, being too kind of like solution oriented, specifically technology solution oriented, is that sometimes we can be like misaligned. Like, you know, just because we can solve a problem, are we solving the right problem? And it's just important to be able to kind of understand like the different trade-offs, as I mentioned before. So, you know, a boost in productivity might, you know, result in frustrations for our users, and really, is it worth it, being able to understand both sides? But really, this new way of thinking is not just limited to technical teams. So going back to the marketing department, you know, is it really worth it to have high resolution images in 12 different fonts if it means that it's, you know, frustrating our users? Maybe we need to scale it back and compromise and say, well, you know, maybe we can optimize our images or just make different choices that we need to make, just being able to understand that. But for a project manager, it might mean including our, you know, our developers in these earlier, you know, discussions about the project before it's clearly defined. It might also mean including extra stakeholders like our customer service representatives or technical support who can really speak to the user's perspective because they know the pain points. They have to deal with it all the time. It's about having this cross collaboration and open dialogue so that people can understand like the effects of certain decisions and having that space, that safe space. So kind of going back to our analogy of a journey, if we work backwards and we think about the end goal, everybody's together and aligned, you know, we can kind of like start here at the mountain and say, okay, how do we want this product to look like? You know, what budget do we want to consider? Like, you know, we have to, again, weigh out, you know, our business needs and, you know, our being productive and being able to meet deadlines, but also understanding our users' experience and like what experience we want them to have, who our target users are. So by being able to work backwards, we can be more aligned within our teams and comfortable to be able to share and discuss. And even if, like I said, for the developers being a part of those more early stage conversations, as well as, you know, talking to marketing and saying, okay, you're requesting these high resolution files, but here's the result of this decision, being able to have those conversations. Okay, what happened? Okay, yeah. So the idea is that if we are more team aligned, we can like realize our user experience web performance opportunities and be able to like be all aligned and pretty and, you know, reach the goal. But wait a minute, this is the real world. I don't want to sell you like this kind of fantasy of, you know, just do this and it's easy. It's not, because for developers, we have to balance a lot of different things, you know, balance our users' experience web performance. We also have to consider like the business needs and then the technical debt, and then also produce quality code. Like, that's a lot. And I understand if it was easy, everyone would be doing this. But it's all about it's the iterative process of, you know, being able to have those dialogues, being able to understand like the entire ecosystem and understand where your individual contribution kind of aligns within the overall like strategic goal, and even being able to openly talk about a web performance strategy within your company. Because design and web performance go hand in hand. Thank you.